Good evening, or good day if you're watching this on video and during the day. Welcome to the House District 50A Candidate Forum. This is co-sponsored by League of Women Voters Edina and League of Women Voters Minnesota. Because of redistricting, we now share space in that area. So let me just say, I'm Colleen Feige. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Edina. And the League of Women Voters strives to make democracy work by promoting active and informed participation in government, increasing understanding of civic issues, and influencing public policy through education and advocacy. We're proud to join other leagues in Minnesota and throughout the U.S. who are nonpartisan organizations, never supporting or opposing any candidate or political party at any level of government. But what we do is we work very hard to grow, empower, and protect the vote. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I just want to mention a minute that the League of Women Voters of Edina and also Bloomington is fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. That is central to League of Women Voter Edina's success in engaging all individuals, households, communities, and policymakers in creating a more perfect democracy. And it's my pleasure to introduce Corinne Shepard, who is the president of the League of Women Voters of Bloomington. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, good evening, everyone, and I want to welcome all the Bloomington voters that are here this evening with us. So thank you. This is a once-in-a-decade election because of redistricting. So I'm really happy and pleased that we are partnering with Edina this year, and for the next 10 years, I believe that we will be working together. So because of changes, we're reminding people to be sure you're registered, make sure you're checking where your precinct is and where your voting location is. Early voting starts this week on the 23rd, so think about voting early, and you have two great resources if you have questions. One is mnvotes.gov, so go there and you can get almost everything you need, or we have our award-winning League of Women Voters website, which is vote411.org, and that's another great resource for you. So I want to say thank you for your participation this evening. I think being an involved and an informed voter is a great way to make democracy work. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Colleen.
Thank you. And for those that live in Edina, the early voting or absentee voting begins, as she said, on the 23rd, and it's here in City Hall. I don't know, where's Bloomington's?
City Hall.
Bloomington City Hall as well for those Bloomington residents. So if you want to go early, go ahead, and it's very easy. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Debbie McNeil, who's a League of Women Voters Edina member, and also the candidate, Heather Edelson. And welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for attending, and to all of you that attend. Or also, this will be posted on both the League of Women Voters Edina website and on the Bloomington website. And it will be, hopefully, tomorrow. It should be posted by tomorrow. We've had a couple glitches getting it posted the day after, but it gets posted. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen and Corinne. Thank you, everyone, for attending this forum, which, as they've said, is sponsored by both the League of Women Voters Edina and the League of Women Voters Bloomington. As Colleen said, I am Debbie McNeil. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Edina. With redistricting, the city of Edina is now in two different state Senate districts. We are now in Senate District 46 and also Senate District 50. And this forum is for House District 50A, which is part of Senate District 50. And although I live in Edina, I am no longer in House District 50. I'm in House District 46B, so I'm not a voter in this election. And similarly, the city of Bloomington is in at least two Senate districts now, 50 and 51. The purpose of this evening's forum is to provide an opportunity to hear the candidates for House District 50A. All candidates who filed with the Minnesota Secretary of State were invited to attend. One invited candidate elected not to participate in tonight's forum. We will discuss principal issues tonight that are of concern to you, the voters. We will try to cover as many issues as possible in the time we have. Please feel free to contact a candidate directly if your question is not addressed tonight. I'll now explain the rules and the format for tonight's forum. The candidate will remain seated throughout the entire candidate forum, and the candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 2 minutes to answer a question that was sent out in advance. Also 2 minutes to answer each question submitted by the community, and 2 minutes to make a closing statement. League volunteers that are sitting before us here will time the candidate's responses and indicate to the candidate when she has 60 seconds remaining, 45 seconds remaining, 30 seconds remaining, 15 seconds remaining, and when the candidate must stop. I, as the moderator, will ask all the questions, and League of Women Voters Edina and Bloomington determine which questions will be asked and attempt in good faith to cover the topics of interest indicated by the submitted questions. And all the written questions become the property of the League of Women Voters Edina. If you have a question in the live audience here, please write your question on a note card and give it to a League volunteer, and they will give it to the question facilitators who are to my right. The City of Edina, which is our site host for this forum, decided in 2022 that they will not live stream the candidate forums for Edina or Bloomington on any of the City of Edina's online platforms, including their website and their YouTube channel and their Facebook page or Edina TV. So the City of Edina is recording this forum and will provide an electronic copy to the League of Women Voters and the League of Women Voters Edina and Bloomington at the end of the forum, as Colleen mentioned. And this will be put on both leagues' websites as soon as possible. I'd like to introduce again the candidate who has appeared tonight. It is Heather Edelson, sitting to my left. So now it's time for opening remarks by the candidate. You have 2 minutes to make opening remarks, Heather Edelson. Please just speak directly into the microphone, not to me. Okay.
Thank you, Debbie. And I want to thank the League of Minnesota Voters, League of Voters for Edina and Bloomington for hosting me this evening, and all of you in the audience that came this evening, also all of you that will be watching this at home. Thank you for tuning in. Your democracy is so important, especially this year. I think every person that runs for office will tell you, but it really this year, it really is incredibly important. And I think we've seen over this pandemic just how important knowing our elected officials is, making sure that we put people in these positions that do want to work across the aisle, that do want to get things done for our city, for our state, and for our communities. Because at the end of the day, when somebody in a community is hurting, you don't see a big R or a big D on their forehead. We don't see that. We see somebody that's in need of housing, somebody that's in need of protection, somebody that wants to make sure that they can get to work on time, that they can pay for child care. And for over the last 4 years, I have really done that. I've led the Civility Caucus at the Capitol, really working to make Democrats and Republicans work together from a bicameral level. That's the Senate and the House. I do just want to note, and it's been my true honor to serve you, just in this time really quick that I have left, I do want to note that my opponent that running in this race has suspended her campaign, yet she will be on the ballot. So while we talk about democracy is important, please make sure to vote in this election for somebody that actually wants the job. I think that would be probably the biggest travesty. Right now, if there will be 2 people to vote for, only one person's here tonight and only one person wants the job.
Thank you. The following question was sent out by the League of Women Voters in advance. And Heather Edelson, you have 2 minutes to respond to it. Here's the question. What would your top priority be for the next legislative session?
That's always a tough one. If anybody looks at my legislative history, I drop about 75 bills every year, which I realize that sounds a lot, but I work with a lot of community groups where they're drafting their bill, and I'll be like, wow, that's a really good idea. I see some of you in the audience. Arnie, who works on housing and really important legislation. So I guess what I would say is education and literacy has always been a really big priority of mine in the legislature. It's a bipartisan issue. That is one where our education omnibus bill got tied up in negotiations, and unfortunately we did not pass it. So literacy, if we look over the pandemic, literacy rates have dropped. Now Edina has it. We fared much better, and I think Bloomington as well fared much better than some parts of the state, but that would definitely be a big priority of mine is looking at education and literacy rates.
Thank you. Now we'll start on questions that were submitted by the general community to League of Women Voters by email or here at the forum. And you have 2 minutes to answer every question this evening. So here's the first question. If elected into a divided legislature, how do you plan to be effective? I'll say it again. If you are elected into a divided legislature, how do you plan to be effective?
Sorry, I had a double take because that's what I've dealt with the last 4 years. So I've been very, I think in total of my 4 years, I honestly probably should keep count, but I know I've passed upwards of 25 to 30 pieces of legislation. Because I do work across the aisle. I actually am genuinely friends with some of the Republicans. I mean, when you have the Senate is led by Republicans and the House is led by Democrats, I don't think my community has elected me to go, just talk about ideas. They've elected me to go get things done. And so I take that very seriously. I'll continue to do that work. I will say that I do hope this last session was incredibly challenging. We've left $7 billion in an account for the state of Minnesota when communities are struggling. And that really became much more partisan than I've ever seen it. And it was heartbreaking. And I genuinely, again, somebody that I get along with Republicans, I get along with the Democrats. I do think that we have to work on how we have conversations with our differences. And I think that starts with the leaders that we elect, making sure that they know that just because our values don't always agree doesn't mean the conversation should end. In fact, I feel like that conversation is just starting to begin. And so you have my commitment to continue to do that.
Thank you. The next question is, tell us what didn't get done in the last legislative session, and what is the path forward for the 2023 session?
That's a great question. Well, a lot didn't get done. I mean, the only things that we passed were a health policy bill and a veterans bill, which was completely bipartisan. Unfortunately, I think we passed an ag bill as well, also an issue that tends to be very bipartisan at the Capitol. But we did not get education. We didn't get public safety. We can't really hire our way out of some of the workforce issues our state is facing right now. That is a big struggle that I think needs to be happening also on the federal level. And I've been in communication with our congressional delegation. We need to really genuinely talk about what the next 10 years is going to look like in the state of Minnesota. We have baby boomers that are aging by 2030. I think every single baby boomer will be 65 or older. And of course, we look at these generations and they're big. But I think we need to make sure that we're taking care of our seniors. We need to make sure that we have adequate funding and pay for folks. How do we do that is working across the aisle. I think that's a bipartisan issue. I think public safety tends to be this discussion where we get kind of held up. But I do genuinely think that we're not that far apart if we can just start listening to each other. But yeah, a lot didn't get done. Public safety, I mean, the list goes on. State government, the health finance bill, people are really counting on us across the state. The housing bill didn't get passed. And it's quite devastating when you think about where we are right now and where we need to be. And it really requires us to work together. And I don't think the partisanship will get very far, I think, in this next year. It's a budget year, so we have to balance the budget. So that means if we want to balance the budget, we got to work together. So I'm hopeful.
As a follow-up to that question, last session, the legislature failed to pass a bonding bill, which could have helped fund some major projects around the state. Would you support a bonding bill in the coming legislative session, which is also a budget session, as you said? Could you tell us why or why not?
Absolutely. We have projects for Bloomington and Edina in the last bonding bill. And so, yes, I will be supporting that. But it's not only because we have projects for Edina and Bloomington. It's because we see if we don't invest in our water infrastructure, what happened in southern part of the country, where we're not investing in our community, we then leave people behind. And I think Minnesotans actually genuinely care about people. We want to make sure that we have safe roads and bridges. I mean, we have that pedestrian walkway right over on the freeway. I'm seeing head nods. Incredibly unsafe, and people want to have access to that. It becomes a mobility issue, and of course, we want to make sure that's ADA compliant when we redo it. I think we're learning to be better stewards of the land that we have too, and making sure that things are more environmentally friendly as we do build. These are all things that we need to discuss, but a bonding bill tends to be bipartisan because everybody wants something for their community. I know that our South Metro Public Safety Center, we got $1 million of bonding funds that I had authored 3 years ago, and that's not enough with inflation. So I've been working with the city on how we can revise some of these things, but absolutely, I'll be supporting a bonding bill to invest in our state, and that's not only our community, but I think Edina and Bloomington want to see the rest of our state thrive as well.
Thank you. The next question is about the state surplus. Minnesota has a $9 billion budget surplus, and what should be done with that? How much of it should be set aside for a part of the rainy day fund?
It's actually $7 billion now, because we've made some. Yes, we did spend some of it with the unemployment trust replenishment as well as the frontline worker. But yeah, we have $7 billion, which is a lot of money. So what should be done with it? We looked at, in our tax bill, cutting Social Security tax. That was one thing. Making sure that we invest in housing. I mean, there was a lot of investment bills that we had in that. But some of it, I've heard right now is people are having a hard time right now with their day-to-day life. Would they appreciate extra money? I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to have a special session. I think anybody that gets in front of a room and tells you that is being unrealistic. So what we end up doing will be interesting, and I'm one of 201 lawmakers. What I would like to see us do is invest in our roads and bridges. I would like to see us invest in housing, especially. I think that we're seeing a lot of homelessness throughout the state, and people can't be successful if they don't have a place to sleep at night. So some investments, but also some just being really responsible about what we do with it, I think, for our future too, because we don't know what's gonna happen over the next few years, especially with inflation as the feds try to get this under control.
Thank you. The next question is about inflation. Do you think there are any actions that the state legislature can and should take to reduce the inflationary pressure on the state's economy? If so, what would those actions be?
I see people campaigning on this issue, and I think it's really, inflation's an incredibly complex issue, and I think you really have to understand it. And it's not only about how it, I think people feel it because they're like, well, the price of goods are up. And so they want more money. But sometimes having more money actually makes inflation worse. So what can we do? I know the Federal Reserve is meeting again to talk about that in the next few days here. And I think everybody in politics, from banking to politics, are going to be paying attention and thinking, what are we going to do? I don't honestly know that at state level what can we do to fix it is really support our Federal Reserve Bank. And as they try to look at the economic policies, we can also try to make sure that people have stability of their schools. We can really look at workforce issues, which I think is huge, trying to make sure that price gouging does not happen. There are things that we can do, but not to the extent, like I hear people talking about gas prices, and I'm sorry, anybody that tells you the state legislature is making your gas prices is just flat wrong. And so I think in campaigns, people make up a lot of things, and I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair to the constituents. And so I think there are things we can do. I don't know that we're going to be able to, I think we really do have to rely on what the Federal Reserve Bank is going to recommend as well with interest rates.
Thank you. Here's the next question. There is a $245 million gap between the 2008 and the 2022 state funding levels for the University of Minnesota, our state's flagship public research university. What's your position on funding the University of Minnesota?
I think that's a great question. The University of Minnesota is one of our gems. This is why we get college students that come here. They're coming to university. This is why we have residents stay. And so I 100% support the University of Minnesota in making sure that we invest in that. We've had several residents here in Edina actually do big matching funds, which I've really lobbied for, the Early Childhood Development Center, and making sure that we invested in that, because we know that the return on our dollar for early childhood is also incredibly smart. So very supportive of. There was a lot of bonding dollars that were in. But in the bonding bill for the university, but also making sure that we're funding it in the higher ed education committee is also important.
Thank you. The next question is about health insurance. What legislation would you support to help more people afford health insurance?
This has been a big discussion. We had some legislation to look at expanding Minnesota Care, so that I had Minnesota Care growing up. So I live in Edina now. I live in Country Club, but I grew up to a single mom, and I struggled. We were on Medicaid, and I was on Minnesota Care as a college student. And I think that experience really has helped me understand just how important it is. There's so many Minnesotans that right now will just not have insurance. And we think that that doesn't happen, but it does. People just choose to not have insurance. And I have family members, actually, that's happened to. And so we don't want people making that decision, whether or not they can eat or they should cover their insurance. I think that expanding Minnesota Care is a really smart way. Another good example of where we could, if we need to, use some of the surplus money to invest in something to make sure that Minnesotans actually have insurance. One other thing we did that I thought was really important was investing to make sure that healthcare medication costs can also become a real barrier for families, and so making sure that we have price caps on that. I think that was really smart legislation that got stalled up at the end of session as well.
Thank you very much. The next question is, given the recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling regarding Roe v. Wade, what measures, if any, do you think the Minnesota legislature should propose regarding women's reproductive health and abortion?
This is a question that I hope that is being asked at every forum across Minnesota, and honestly across the United States. I think that we should put into the Constitution that a woman has access to make choices for her own body with her doctor. And it should have nothing to do with somebody else's faith or somebody else's politics. It's too much. This is where we go too far with some of our politics. And so I am absolutely pro-choice. I think that there are a lot of conversations that happen behind a door. When you are pregnant, you don't know what's going on with that pregnancy. And how do we decide to insert ourselves into those private discussions because it makes political sense? those are people we don't want to vote for, and I think it's dangerous. It's a very dangerous, slippery slope. And so I do worry, though, if Republicans that are strongly in favor of the pro-life movement, that they would put a constitutional amendment on, even if Governor Walz would win, they could put a constitutional amendment to the voters if they have the House and Senate control, and they could word it. If you think about marriage equality, remember we had to vote no. Well, this would be something cryptic and strange as well, and so it would confuse voters, and that would be a really complicated thing. I hope we don't end up being there.
The next question is, what do you see as the legislature's role in promoting public safety and curbing increased crime?
Well, when we had crime go up here in Edina, which was the winter of 2021, I worked closely with our police chief, Todd Milburn, to make sure that we were addressing crime. We called and we got on the phone with the county attorneys. We worked, I think our officers did a great job. And what we are seeing is a rise in youth crime. And I think that is troubling, because I think, there's lots of discussions about, try them as adults. And what we've seen over the pandemic, and I tried to fight to open some of our youth institutions during the pandemic, just like I fought to open businesses safely. I think we can have moderation. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. But what I would hate, I do a lot of work on juvenile work, and that a child makes a bad decision, and these are all kids, that their life is ruined forever. Now, that crime's not okay, and I do think they should be held accountable, but I also believe in second chances. So we need to deal with our aggravated robberies. Absolutely have gone up. I'm proud to not only, I'm supported by the police, I work across the aisle, but I'm also somebody that will have those hard conversations, because equity, racial equity does end up being an issue. And so I think that we just need to listen to each other. We also have an officer shortage. We can't hire our way out of this problem either. But the one kind of positive thing, just to note in terms of looking at one of the things is when you look at enrollment in public safety, what you are seeing is more women come into law enforcement, which I actually think is an interesting thing, just to highlight here.
Here's the next question. Can you describe any state-level gun legislation that you would support? And how do you plan to address the issue of automatic weapons?
Well, I'm on the Public Safety Committee, so I feel when I first was elected, it was, I believe that was the first or second year. My memory's failing in that, but we had the background check closure. I was a co-author on the bill. We had the hearing. I was vice chair on the Public Safety Committee that year. We also had the red flag law bill that we passed through the House. And we had hearings that day, and we passed that legislation late into the night. And I remember I was a Moms Demand Action volunteer before I was elected. And that's the other thing. When we talk about public safety, like, we must, in that same conversation, talk about how gun violence has gone up and access to guns have gone up. And what do we do about that? I would absolutely support more intervention in terms of ghost guns, more intervention in terms of assault rifle bans. There's been ideas about floating a tax on ammunition. There's a lot of different ideas, but what I will say is our state and our country absolutely has a problem with too many guns. And so how do we deal with that in a bipartisan way is something I don't have any answer on, but if you have ideas, I genuinely would love to hear them. Because every time, even at that hearing, I think back several years ago, and there were people that were carrying, because you can carry a gun at the Capitol. So we're having this hearing about guns, and there's people that are armed. And they're worried because they want their Second Amendment right. But what about children's rights, and what about our community's rights when people are being assaulted by guns? It's a real conversation we need to have.
Here's a question on education. Can you please describe legislation that you would support to ensure that all Minnesota children receive a high-quality education?
Well, that's a loaded question. There is a lot of really good bills, but I think we have to address discipline disparities. African American children are suspended at significantly higher rates. We have to address this achievement gap or opportunity gap, I guess you could call it. Literacy rates, I truly believe we need to work on literacy. I was dyslexic growing up, and people thought, well, what's wrong with her? She can't read. And I had to repeat third grade. And trust me, it took me years to tell people this. But now I know that me repeating that third grade and me saying it in front of other people actually has power, because so many young people struggle with reading. And I think it's important that we talk about our challenges, because young people, their frontal lobes are not developed. They don't understand that later on they possibly could get it. And also, if they don't get intervention, will they ever get it? And so asking for help is really hard. And so I think making sure that we have addressing that, of course, math is really important. I think adding more teachers of color is really a critical thing. We've made some pretty big investments in that. I'd like to see us continue to do more. Boy, there's so many parts of more mental health is a huge issue that we're seeing with our young people today. I've increased school-linked mental health throughout the years. I've had legislation for that. There's a lot of stuff I'm missing, but those are some big ones. The other thing is my background as a therapist. We're looking at, like, what are we going to do in terms of getting kids the access to mental health supports in schools that they need. And people are really seeing a lot of really positive results with dialectical behavioral therapy. I did cognitive behavioral, but it is interesting because it's like, well, how could we do group tools and things like that to really help kids? Because you think about investing in a public education, what does that actually mean? And I think we always have to be rethinking that.
Here's the next question. What would you do to support and expand public transportation options? For example, light rail, biking infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure, et cetera.
Well, I'm going to not say anything about light rail, because I don't know if you guys have watched the news. It's kind of a mess. And I don't honestly know what we're going to do with that. It's something... Boy, I don't know what we're going to do with that one. But I do believe in bus rapid transit, which we actually, I believe we got last year, not this last year, but the year before. We got some more bus expansion into Edina. I think making sure there was just that Infrastructure Investment Act that was passed on the federal level. Those are dollars that are going to be great for our state. I don't know exactly what our allocation for Minnesota is, but those are great. I mean, this is what tax money is for, is making sure that we have a really good infrastructure too, so that you can drive to all the beautiful parts of Minnesota. But I do think I want us to focus on what that green energy is going to look like in terms of our automobiles and clean cars. I think that we really need to start breaking that down a little bit more. Even myself, I kind of want to understand. I love public policy, but you want to understand, like, logistically how that's going to work. And we know that automobiles are one of the largest polluters and contributors to the current. I don't know about you guys, but it feels like there's climate change happening in the air outside. It feels a little warmer than it normally is in Minnesota at this time.
This is a follow-up to the last question on public transportation. What are your thoughts on the delay of the Southwest Light Rail project and its increased budget? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it's a mess. Yeah, I think it's very frustrating. It makes me... It makes me think back to the licensing, the MNLARS issue when I was first elected. Everybody remember that? Please nod your head. Oh, that was not good. And we just had to, we had to just deal with it. And that was really expensive and it was painful. And I remember Democrats and Republicans were in the halls at the Capitol saying, oh my goodness. Everybody was mad. I think Southwest Light Rail, I would love to see it. I think we're in a really interesting place with right now. I think it's really good intention, and I think that there's a lot of economic opportunity there, but I also know that it's in a place that I don't think everybody has a lot of good answers for that one right now. So I guess I would like some more answers from those that are leading that project as well. So that's Met Council.
All right, here's a new topic, housing. What do you see as the role of the state legislature in addressing housing inequities?
Having access to housing is a fundamental human right. It absolutely is. So if we have people that are homeless in our community, boy, I think we have to take a reflective mirror, and look at ourselves, because that's not okay. So, when inflation goes up, rents also can go up, and people are, all of these things are impacting folks right now. So, when people take that to campaign, like the state legislature can fix it, of course, people are going to respond to that. But that we're not going to be able to fix all of those things at the state legislature. And people that are telling you that that's not necessarily truth, but absolutely people should deserve to have access to housing. Home ownership, there's a disparity there, a racial disparity in terms of looking at who owns homes and who does not. So I definitely would love to see us do more investments in housing, and I think that's going to change too as we see people age. More people want to age in their home, but also that means that we have to have more people to care and go into homes. And I mean, these issues are, it's like housing. It's like housing's attached to healthcare and it's attached to workforce. So all of these issues are so interconnected. But yes, I believe that we should. I'm supportive of making sure people have housing.
Here's a question on the new hemp law. As of July 1st, 2022, as you know, Minnesota has a new law regulating the sale of food and beverage products containing limited amounts of THC that is derived from hemp. What do you see as the benefits and/or drawbacks of this law? And what do you think, are there any changes or additions that should be made to this law?
Well, I was waiting for that question, so I'm glad you asked it. I figured it would come up. So I've worked on medical cannabis since I was elected in 2018. I believe that cannabis does have medicinal qualities to it. As somebody that had breast cancer at 35, you're looking at medicines to deal with some of the things, and absolutely, I think cannabis helps with that. Now, how this bill and how this issue came before me is a little complicated, and I know you're going to hold up the card, and I apologize, but I kind of want the public to hear on this. So.
Well, we can extend the time.
That would be good. I'm just going to keep going. Sorry about that, Ron.
So if it's all right with the audience and the timekeepers, maybe we'll suspend the time to respond for this question and hear you out, Heather Edelson. Thank you.
Thank you. So what happened was there was a Supreme Court decision so first of all, I'm the chair of the Medical Cannabis Task Force. So at the legislature, an issue came before us that Delta 8 and Delta 10 products were being sold all throughout the state in either CBD shops or in tobacco shops and other retail, sometimes gas stations, and they would look like candy, gummy bears, like techies, so they would take this spray THC and spray it on there. And so there was an issue and a concern that was brought up at the task force meeting. So then we looked into it. We started to look into it, and as we were looking into it, this was probably January of 2021, in March, the Loveless Minnesota Supreme Court decision came out. And I'm going to bring you through a timeline, so I just want you to get the full story. So, and the Loveless decision came out. So the Loveless decision essentially said that if a person has any THC product or a product that, like, it could be CBD lotion, which lots of people were using, CBD, any sort of product with a trace amount of THC, that would be considered a felony. So all the CBD shops that people were using, and they were all over the place. Anybody using CBD drinks, which really honestly have no mood-altering effect, right? CBD without THC doesn't really do much to you. They will say that there's benefits to your muscles and things like that. But so we had a huge problem on our hand. We were going to essentially start criminalizing a bunch of people that were using a product that was really non-intoxicating. So I met with then Cody Weiberg, who was the executive director of the Board of Pharmacy, and he and I started to work on, how do we deal with this Loveless decision? But then I was like, at the task force meeting, there's these other products that are being sold all over the place. How do we address those as well? And so Mark Cran, who is Senator Cran, he is in the Senate, and he works on medical cannabis with me. And so one of my colleagues that I get along with and respect, he's on the task force as well. So we start talking about how could we maybe address this. Is it perfect? No. Absolutely not. But we had several hearings on it in the House. What I tried to do is, because I was the author of Tobacco 21, so when Edina became the first one to pass Tobacco 21 in the state of Minnesota, Edina was the one. I helped with that city ordinance before I was elected. Now, fast forward, I was the chief author in the Minnesota legislature when we passed it. So here we are again. Now, fast forward to this moment where we're finding out about these products. What were being sold under the guise that under the 2018 Farm Bill they were legal, and they weren't. The 2018 Farm Bill actually legalized Delta 9, and Delta 9, because there was like, oh, Heather, you snuck it through. And I want to be very clear that I never snuck anything through. That is not my style. I would never do that. I respect my colleagues too much to do that. But I will tell you that when people pass legislation and they don't know all the ins and outs, that happens much more than people think. It happens quite frequently because you have people that are in the weeds on an issue. I say that sounds funny. But yeah, so... But you go to solve a policy problem, and what we were trying to deal with were these products that were being sold. There was no age limit; they could be sold to anyone. The potencies were really high, so the potencies could be 1,500 milligrams in a little package. And if anybody wants to come see, I have some pictures in my phone. There were some that were 100 milligrams per gummy. And so people were rightfully they were getting sick. And so while this current law at 5 milligrams per gummy and 50 milligrams per package, and making sure people are 21 and older, and not having child packaging that targets kids is not perfect. And I realize the state regulations are lacking, and I'm working on that right now. In fact, I'll be working on that for several weeks to try to start getting that legislation moving and convening groups and law enforcement. I have really taken the initiative. There's not a lot of lawmakers after you pass the bill that are essentially managing the law. And that's what I've been doing behind the scenes, and really trying to make it successful so that we can figure out what to do next session. And working across the aisle, I've already reached out to my Republican colleagues to apologize for some of the things that were reported that I snuck something over, because I never did that. I would never do that. That was insulting to my own integrity. And I think that this law is too important. It's not about one person. It's about all of us. It's about making sure that we can have this discussion. So it's 19 plus states have passed some form of legal recreational cannabis. And while I started off being opposed to it several years ago, I think it's an inevitable discussion. So I think we're going to have to work together on how we're going to regulate it, and deal with the many issues. There's many things that will come up, and some that we could never even think of.
Let's go back now to 2-minute questions. This question is on the proposed local sales tax increase in Edina. Just as background, Edina city leaders have proposed $39.3 million in improvements to Fred Richards Park and to Braemar Park and Arena. And they also proposed $25.3 million to expand Braemar Arena for a total proposal of $64.6 million. The state legislature authorized the city to ask Edina voters to approve a 0.5% local sales and use tax to pay for the $39.3 million part of improvements to Fred Richards and Braemar. So on November 8th, Edina voters will vote on 2 ballot questions and decide whether to approve a local 0.5% sales tax for up to 19 years to finance these $39.3 million in improvements. But the legislature did not decide whether the city could ask voters to approve the 0.5% sales tax increase to finance the $25.3 million to expand Braemar Arena. This proposed expansion would demolish the south rink and add 2 new ice rinks. It would build an improved drop-off pickup area. It would add parking and expand the lobby. And that description is from edina@play.org, a city-sponsored website. In the 2023 legislative session, the city plans to ask the legislature to approve a second sales tax referendum for this $25.3 million expansion. So the question, now getting to the question, do you think the legislature should allow Edina to hold a second sales tax referendum for Braemar expansion in the future? And if yes or no, and if so, well, if so or not, how would you advocate at the legislature for or against this proposal? For 2 minutes.
I don't even think we need 2 minutes. Yes, I would support it. I was the chief author in the House on that. We did have it in the final tax bill, and it was unfortunate that that tax bill is just sitting there, even though there's an agreement on it. And it was not easy to get that local option sales tax, by the way. Nobody knows what happens at the Capitol, but behind the scenes, whew, not easy because people, sometimes it's viewed as local option sales taxes as being inequitable, but we need a new stadium, and you don't want to raise property taxes. You've got to try to find a balance. It gives cities tools. It's hard. It's a hard balance that we have, but yeah, no, I would love to see us have a new arena. I think that would be great. I mean, a lot of other cities that are comparable to Edina, I think Bloomington also as well got a local option sales tax that was sitting in the tax bill, but so I think there will be a lot of people coming back for local option sales tax because several cities are using them as tools to not raise property taxes, but to get new facilities in their communities. So I'll be supportive.
The next question asks, on which committees do you currently serve, and will those change in the next legislative session? And could you also tell us if you have a choice in committee assignments? Can you choose them?
Yes. So I'm right now on Labor and Veterans Affairs. I'm on Education Policy, and I'm also on Public Safety. I'm also Assistant Majority Leader at the Capitol, and so there's our other duties. Sometimes you have 4 committees. Yes, those committees do tend to change. I've always been on Public Safety. It's an area of policy I really enjoy because I do work across the aisle. I'm able to kind of bring all ideologies together to try to find mutual ground. Unfortunately, it didn't work this year. Yeah, I mean, I would love to, I'm going to just be honest, I would love to chair a committee if we're in the majority next year or this coming January, but we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens.
Here's the next question. Medical aid in dying is not a high priority in the legislature, but do you support it? If so, why? And why is it so hard to pass? Yes, I absolutely support it. And I know that we have 2 advocates in our community, one specifically that's a big proponent, and I'm very much in favor of it. I think it gives people, I think it goes back to that same discussion about giving a person choice between what they think is right for them, between that conversation and them and their doctor.
Yeah, we have a good family friend that died of bone cancer. And I remember watching her husband, a physician, just watching how she no longer was herself. And, she didn't have any choices. We have modern advancement of medicine. Everybody's trying to save her, but she wanted to be done. And that wasn't what those around her wanted. And so I think these are conversations that end up being very partisan at the Capitol. I remember when I was on the health committee, when I was first elected, I would like to be on the health committee again. This became, we had people flew in from California, I believe, and they called it medical, they called it suicide. And I thought, well, one of the physicians that is in support had said, if you're in a burning building and the building's burning and you jump, is that suicide? And I thought that was probably a perfect analogy of what somebody might be feeling. So very supportive.
Here's the next question. Here's the next question. Please let us know what legislation you would support to encourage more companies to stay and to grow in Minnesota.
What specifically, I think I'm at a loss at this one. I will say that the Chamber of Commerce is supporting my campaign. I very much work with businesses throughout the pandemic. I worked with businesses in the governor's office and Commissioner Steve Grove, actually, to open businesses during the pandemic and find safety plans for them to operate. I am somebody that absolutely knows that business is it's the economic driver. If we don't have good, strong businesses, then we don't have jobs. And I think I would let businesses, within moderation, work with me on finding what they would need. I think red tape ends up being a constant thing that's brought up. But like, what specifically? If it's lowered taxes for businesses, I guess I want to, hear what's going on with it, because according to kind of what I look at across the nation, we're not necessarily the highest, but we're not the lowest. So pro-business would love to hear like what businesses specifically would like to see more of.
This will be the last question before any closing remarks you'd like to make. Can you tell us what would your plan be to elicit constituents' issues and points of interest to your constituents?
I'm sorry, Debbie, did you say what would I do?
Yeah, what would you do to find out what your constituents' main issues and concerns are, to learn about those?
Got it. Well, I'm in the community a lot. I'm door knocking in our community. I think that's a really great way to find out personally what people are thinking. I try to attend coffees, try to go to local community events. I think you find out from I'm on our local I'm on the crime fund board with our Edina Police Department. I attend coffees at senior centers. I really do care about our community and want to see people feel well represented, whether that is because I think we think too much about party and not enough about, in the House, it's really about the person and it's about your values. And so it's really great to talk to people. I email people a lot. I'm always happy to talk to folks. If they email me, I'm like, let's talk, let's have coffee. So if you'd like to have coffee, genuinely, it's an open invitation. Please email me. I don't know if you can put that on the screen, but it's Edelson, Edelson @gmail. You can reach me that way, but would love to hear from community members.
So that's all the time we have for questions this evening. So now I would invite you to make closing remarks for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Debbie, for moderating. I appreciate it. I answered everyone but one question. That was good. It's been an honor to serve Edina over the last 4 years. It truly has, and it's not been an easy 4 years. It's not been for any of us. And I think of the last 3 years specifically, and it's not what I signed up for when I first ran for office, right? In 2018, we had a surplus, and there was no pandemic. And then, by March of 2020, things had changed. But we've grown as a community, and whenever I've gone through hard things in my life, it always has made me stronger. I think it has made our state stronger. And I want us to know that we're not alone in this. And, don't think about somebody just because they're opposite party of you as being your enemy. They're really not. Their values and how they grew up are probably helping to frame those. And they might be a really good person that you could be a really good friend with. I hope that we can start having conversations again with each other. And really talking about our values versus the division. I pledge to you over the next 2 years that I will continue to do that great work where I really reach across the aisle. If we have a divided legislature, if I'm in the minority, I'll really do a good job trying to hopefully get our issues heard, because what happens is if you're in the party, as a Democrat, if Republicans have a majority, they won't really hear my bills. So I've passed a lot of bills because we've been in the majority. So I do hope for that purpose that we will be in the majority. And outside of that, I think politics are a way for us to get things done as a community. So it's been an honor, and I'll look forward to connecting with you all throughout the community.
Thank you, Heather Edelson, for participating in this forum, and thank you for your willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. Thank you to the League of Women Voters Edina and the League of Women Voters Bloomington for sponsoring this forum. The City of Edina videotaped this forum, as was mentioned before, and will provide it to the leagues, both leagues, and it will be available as soon as possible. We hope the next day or the second day after that for viewing on the League of Women Voters Edina website and on Bloomington's website. Edina's website is lwvedina.org. Thank you to the live audience for attending tonight's forum. And everyone, please remember to vote by 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 8th. Early voting starts on Friday, September 23rd, right here at Edina City Hall. This concludes the forum for State House District 50A. Good evening, and thank you for attending.